Alright then, this is Dr. Jimmy again, and continuing right where I left off my previous video, which was part 16 of Halloween Horror Nights history for Ripped from the Silver Screen, Halloween Horror Nights 19 from the year 2009. This would be part 17 of my Horror Nights history for that event. And I had begun in the previous video discussing the scare zones of the event, and I'd gotten through 2 of them, and I'd gotten on to the 3rd of the 6 scare zones that are featured in the brochure for the event. Now, this 3rd scare zone, as I had said, was War of the Living Dead, and I talked about how it was American and German soldiers from the Second World War now turned into zombies, continuing their conflict after their mortal death, and sort of fighting forever beyond death, continuing the fight on and on and on. Rather interesting. And I had mentioned the fact that, describing some of the outfits the characters wore, that there were no swastikas, no Nazi symbols on the German uniforms, even though they were obviously German Nazi soldiers from the Second World War. And I had stated that I believe this was done simply to try to diminish any offense that the image of a swastika might have on guests who might be offended by it, particularly Jewish guests who find such a symbol offensive just when they see it. I am not particularly certain that I myself agree with that logic. I think it's rather stupid to have a historical scare zone where you leave out important details, but again, it's sort of like when they did American Werewolf a few years later, when they did that in 2013 and then repeated it last year. There's a very famous scene from the movie where Nazi demon werewolf creatures attack David Kester and his family in their home, shooting them up and slaughtering them all, ending with David getting his throat slit, which is a rather horrific image, a nightmare sequence that happens in the film. It's a nightmare that David has while he's in hospital and wakes up and it's like, holy fuck. He's, horrified. But this nightmare happens very quickly in the film, very quickly indeed. And some details that were in this scene, for example, when they put the house, you have this classic nightmare scene, because everyone would want to see that in the house, which tries to replicate scenes as close as possible in very good detail from the original movie. But again, there were no swastika armbands on any of these demon werewolf Nazi creatures in the nightmare in that scene in the house either year. And also, another striking detail was left out. In the Kester household, in the movie, you can see quite clearly on the mantelpiece a Hanukkah menorah, which clearly identifies the Kester family as being Jewish, which had been suggested by a character during the movie when the nurses are talking about David being circumcised and whether or not he's Jewish, because it's common practice in the United States. But this then says, yes, indeed, this character is Jewish. His family is Jewish, of course. But in this house, of course, there were some nice candlesticks on the mantelpiece, but they were not. They were just ordinary candlesticks. They were not menorahs of any sort whatsoever. There was nothing in that room to identify the family specifically as Jewish. And I think that whereas in the movie it happens very quickly in the context of a film, in the context of a haunted house, a guest who may not even seen the film goes into that scene and then is confronted with werewolves and demons wearing Nazi uniforms with swastikas, shooting and mutilating and killing a family, and there's a menorah over on the wall. That would tell them immediately, oh my God, we have Nazis killing Jews as part of a haunted house, and it might be extraordinarily offensive to people, especially if they don't understand the context of the scene, because not everybody going through might have even seen the movie, you see. So that's why they left the menorah out of the house. That's why there were no swastika armbands on those uniforms of those characters in that nightmare sequence in the haunted house. For the same reason, I believe, they left them out from War of the Living Dead. Although, again, I'm not sure that that sort of gives a historical inaccuracy, because then you just have German zombies. rather than Nazi zombies. And of course, you know they were Nazis. It's the Second World War, for crying out loud. That's what the war was about, for pity's sake. And I think maybe putting it in the Pacific Islands was also to try to soften it, rather than putting it in Europe, which might, I don't know, offend people. Instead of placing it somewhere where putting it just on a random Pacific island. Although it's possible this had something to do with the whole storyline, although there was nothing in any of the back material seen on the website to explain what happened. But just my pure speculative theorizing, one could conceive that perhaps somebody, someone's loved one or a village or whatever might have been killed during the course of the conflict, and there might have been a witch doctor or a shaman, or if it was in Europe, it would have been a witch or somebody who got mad and then cursed both sides, a curse on both of your armies, and thus turning them into zombies and dooming them to fight forever and ever. In either case, the Scare Zone was a sort of take on the old cliche, war is hell, because in this case, it was true, literally, condemned to fight for all eternity as zombies. The Scare Zone also had some very lovely American patriotic military martial music playing from John Philip Sousa, like the Washington Post March and Stars and Stripes Forever and all that stuff playing in the background. Not your usual Scare Zone music, so that was made for a very different sort of sound. And as far as motion picture inspirations, again, this was an original Scare Zone, but it was inspired very much from a recently released, at that time, Swedish horror zombie movie called Dead Snow, which featured Nazi zombies, particularly that SS officer who was a dead ringer, pun intended, for the character in the movie. In fact, it was so close that, anyone who saw the movie would immediately recognize that character. So, oh yeah, that's where that's from. So it was, although it wasn't a Dead Snow Zone. Perhaps that's why they put it in Pacific Islands, so they could not be accused in any way of ripping off the movie more than they were. That could be part of it. I don't know. So, the fourth Scare Zone was located on Hollywood Boulevard, in that that small portion of Hollywood Boulevard, beginning right about if you go into Hollywood and you start to turn, where the Brown Derby, actually it's a hat shop, is located, and across the street is the Terminator 2 attraction. Right from that point you turn and go up Hollywood Boulevard all the way up to, but stopping right about where Mel's Drive-In and the Pantages Theatre are, not going past that point. So that small portion of Hollywood Boulevard. Not quite as much as they'd used the year before for Asylum in Wonderland even, but just that little chunk of Hollywood. And that Scare Zone was called Lights Camera Hacktion. And it was every year, of course, since at least 93 or 94, there had been a chainsaw drill team running amok in the streets for Halloween Horror Nights. In fact, there had been a sort of chainsaw maniac from 91 and some chainsaws in the streets in 92 as well. So this is actually a tradition that goes back to the beginning of the event. Although they weren't actually called chainsaw drill teams, I think, until 93 or so. The chainsaw drill team was not featured as an independent unit running amok in the streets in 2009, roaming about, a roaming horde, if you use the modern parlance. That's what we call them nowadays. But back then, the chainsaw drill team in 2009 had its own zone. It was designated to have its own Scare Zone. And the idea behind this Scare Zone was that they were shooting a movie, Hollywood Chainsaw Massacre or something along those lines, about a chainsaw drill team type unit of crazed lunatics running amok with their chainsaws. Except, unknowingly, the filmmakers actually hired the real deal. The actors they hired were not normal actors, they were the actual chainsaw drill team themselves. And so when action was called and the clapper was clapped, all of a sudden, then, instead of just going through the script, they started following their own script of actually dismembering the crew, other cast members, and the crew of the film itself. You know, eviscerating the best boy, gaffing the gaffer, you know, slaughtering the script girl, disemboweling the director. Oh, what fun. Yes. So, and you know what? The film crew, God help them, they're dedicated to their craft. I'm sure Paolo Ravinsky himself would have been proud that they kept on filming, even whilst they're being mutilated and murdered. What dedication. And Ravinsky would say, of course, you know, sacrifice is necessary for art, except, of course, in his films, it's the other way around. It's the filmmaker slaughtering the actors, not the actors slaughtering the filmmakers. But nevertheless, he still might have been impressed by it. Of course, he was not present in that scare zone that year. In fact, he wasn't present that year at all. Now, fun. Of course, everybody loves Chainsaw Drill Team, the highly energetic, mobile, agile, hostile, with the rip-roaring chainsaws causing everybody to scream and run in panic. Always a great fun in any year's event, and this time set right there on Hollywood Boulevard. But I cannot think of Lights Camera Hacktion without thinking of Roberto. Roberto, at that time, was a nice young man, about 13 years old, very energetic, enthusiastic fan of Halloween Horror Nights. Used to be on HHN Vault under the name Bert's, and used to post quite a bit about all sorts of stuff, was always happy and excited about the event, and very enthusiastic, and was friends with many of the people that I would hang out with at the event, like Kim and Chris and Rob and Rachel, and a lot of other people that I knew then, and Nikki and others that I would want to go to the event with. And so I was familiar with this lad, although I really wasn't on very, I mean, I wasn't really like, I didn't know him that well. He was someone who was there with someone else that I knew, basically. But I was familiar with him from online, of course, primarily from online. But he was very enthusiastic, but he posted frequently that he was terrified of chainsaws. And so he would post in the vault, you know, I'm not going anywhere near that scare zone because chainsaws terrify me, there's no way. And then the fatal error. You can't make me. I'm sorry, but when you post something like, I'm not going in that scare zone and you can't make me, and of course it's read by his friends, most of whom are about the same age, they're going to say, oh yeah, you don't wave, you know, in front and such a red flag. You know, that's like waving a red flag at a ball. And so his other friends, his other, who are also young people, teenagers mostly, would say, oh yeah, we're going to drag you into that scare zone, they're going to saw you up. And he said, no, it won't happen. You'll never make me. I'll never go in that scare zone. Won't do it. So, and he made a second fatal error. This was all posted, of course, on a thread in the HHN Vault forums about the scare zone itself. Now, HHN Vault had by that time become the preeminent spot on the internet for Halloween Horror Nights fans. It was the go-to place for the Halloween Horror Night fan community online to find out about the event. There weren't a lot of Facebook groups yet, if there even was any, and there were other forums, of course, Chainsaw Wolf, Orlando United, but the Vault had risen up to quite prominence, and so because of that, people who were scare actors were sometimes members of the Vault as well. There was people who were fans of the event to begin with and then decided to audition and become scare actors. They had already been on the Vault and then they became scare actors. But there were also people who, once they became scare actors and were cast in a particular scare zone or house, they heard about the Vault from other people, and they wanted to see what those people on the vault would say about them. So they would register on the vault themselves, even if they never posted there, so they could lurk and read what other people were saying about their performances, about what they saw at the event, especially their own zones, because of course they want to know how they affected these hardcore fans very much. Also, of course, there were threads on the vault where people would take photographs and post them, and especially if you're in a scare zone, you might want to go there to see if anyone took a picture of you and put it up, because then you can save that picture. You might not be able to get a photo of yourself in action in a scare zone, but someone might post it, and then, oh my good, there's a picture of me, I can keep that as a souvenir. See, that's another reason why this. So there were already scare actors who were in that zone, who read Bertz's statements, his proclamations over on HHN Vault that he was not going to ever set foot in their scare zone. And they read the other kids saying, oh yeah, you will. And so that too riled them up, and they said, oh yeah, you come into our scare zone, we know what you look like, because Roberto made a third mistake. He posted a picture of himself in one of the threads where you show your own picture, because a lot of people in the vault did that back then because they wanted the scare actors to know what they look like so they can get a really good scare when they went through the houses or the scare zones. So they said, we know what you look like, you come in here, we'll get you. So all of that challenging was happening back and forth. So he inadvertently challenged all these scare actors and set himself up, because you know what happened. On one of the first occasions, his friends grabbed him and tried to force him into Lights Camera Hacktion. I did not see this, but I was told that Roberto lashed his arms and legs around a light pole at the top of Hollywood Boulevard near Mills Drive-In while they're trying to pull him off and take him into Lights Camera Hacktion. And I was told it was very amusing. He was practically horizontal. They're holding his feet and he's hanging on to the light pole saying, no, 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 I'm not going in. You can't make me. That time they didn't quite get him into the zone. But on Halloween night, I was there, and there was a young lady, a couple years older than Roberto at the time, and I believe her name was Orby, or maybe it was Sherby. I'm not certain, because they're identical twin sisters, Orby and Sherby, and I don't remember which one it was off the top of my head, but one of them walked up to Roberto and physically picked him up. This little girl, picked him up and carried him physically into the zone. I was impressed. When I saw that, I immediately started fumbling for my iPhone so I could capture this for posterity. By the time I got my video working, he was already in the zone. And so I took a video. It shows, of course, Roberto in the Lights Camera Hacktion zone, and there is Orby or Sherby, whichever one it was. And there's a scare actor with a chainsaw, and Roberto's hiding behind the girl, like, oh, save me, and she's not going to save him. She drug him into the zone in the first place. And, of course, the chainsaw bursts into life, and he lurches forward and chases Roberto, who runs like a little bunny, boing, 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 off into the back of the scene, which was also rather unfortunate, as he wasn't running out of the zone, but deeper into it. At that point I stopped my video, but I posted it on my YouTube channel. You can find it. It was posted on October 31st, Halloween night of 2009. It's called Bertz Gets Hacked in Hacktion. It's a very short little clip of this scene I just described. It's the first time I ever took footage at the event itself and posted it on my YouTube channel. I've only done that maybe twice. And so it's sort of historic in that regard, but it captures that moment. That wasn't the end of that moment, however. I didn't take any further video. In fact, I went with some of my friends off to do other things, to go to houses and shows, etc. But what I understand that happened is that Roberto got completely surrounded by a chainsaw drill team in the middle of Hollywood Boulevard. And people were there, including Rob and Rachel and the other Rachel. This is not the Rachel who's now married to Rob, but the and they live in California now. But a different Rachel, who I think was from Pennsylvania, very pretty girl. Trying to distinguish Rachel from Rachel, but it's like kind of hard because I can say, well, the one that's a witch. Well, they're both witches actually, or at least both some sort of pagan practitioners of esoteric traditions. So it's hard to say, but this Rachel is known as Moon Shadow or Moonflower or Moon Dragon or something. I forget what her name was on the vault. She had one of those sorts of names, and she was a very good photographer. And so she actually took lots of pictures of what happened, and then they were available for posterity of what happened to Roberto at this point. And she also, and someone else took video of it and posted it at YouTube. So there's a very lengthy video out this summer of poor Rob being terrorized, absolutely, practically in tears, shaking and screaming in a very high-pitched voice as he's being harassed by those chainsaw drills. It's almost the point of bullying, and I really felt sorry for him. However, if Roberto had ever told me directly to take my video down, I would have, and he never did. And in spite of all of his protesting, I think he enjoyed the fame he got out of it, because Roberto is an actor, you see, and I think he enjoyed the publicity. Another thing, I told my friends, you know what, we shouldn't do this because in a couple of years he's going to be 6'4" and weigh 250 pounds, and he's going to be a scare actor here with a chainsaw, and he'll come after us. Wait and see. I was wrong. I was wrong. And I'll get to why I was wrong in the next part, 18.